Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here and share my Canadian experience on this very difficult and exciting and never-ending digital transformation story. In Canada, we, not nearly to the degree of Estonia, of course, but we, as with many other countries, were hugely successful when e-government was first announced a couple of decades ago. In fact, we were considered first in the world for 5 years in a row. It's just coincidental at that time that I was part of the executive team that designed and implemented e-government. However, then I moved to academia, and we are no longer first in the world. Again, that's not necessarily related. However, so for a period after when I was was involved with the government of Canada, I had the opportunity, because we had done so well, to travel the world and speak widely on what were Canada's lessons learned. Why were we so successful and what we had to share? We have many comments to offer. However, I also learned that as we were undertaking this, many countries, including Canada, were all disappointed with the goals that we thought we could make. We were expecting social harmony, economic sustainability, stronger democratic participation, modernization of our services, goals that we hear today. And many of us have undertaken failure rates around the world of over 70% of e-government or digital transformation projects fail. So as an academic, I undertook to work with an organization out of Washington called the World Information Technical and Services Alliance, with the technology associations in 80 countries, to say what were our lessons learned as to why we were successful, and more importantly, what were the lessons learned or the findings as to what were those barriers that kept us from exploding into the digital transformation world as the rest of society was advancing, and yet in the public sector, in our world, we were not advancing nearly to the same level as the rest of the government. We were tied on still into a silo approach, into inefficiencies, into massive resource utilization, and we were not moving to the goal that we had anticipated. And so from this survey and from my research articles, over a couple of dozen in peer-reviewed journals, and my experience, we've come up with what I say, is a missing link. The thing holding us back are two elements, and I'm happy to share them with you today. One element is the integrated role of project management with change management. Project management methodologies in North America, and to some degree in Europe as well, are based upon anachronistic mechanisms for managing projects that do not meet our complex, unprecedented, evolving, elaborate digital transformational world that we currently live in. We are building projects that are unprecedented, outcomes are unknown, resource requirements are unknown, they've never been built before, we have no way of learning from one another on an international lessons learned stage, and our project management tools are not automated and they are not helpful. In fact, this finding was so stark and so recognized internationally that I was the honorable recipient of an IBM fellowship a few years ago, that IBM said, if you can define it, we can build it. Well, I'm here today. We have not yet built it, and we're still struggling with designing what is that package that would meet this digital need and serve our needs. So there's two elements. One, the fact that the automated project management and integrated project management system does not exist, based upon a results-based requirement as opposed to a traditional systems-based. And secondly, the change management element, which is the cultural environment, content, people, and process element that we have not so well as leaders addressed in the last decade or so. That element has to be advanced as well. Also, from this international work, we came up with a compendium of 10 major barriers that are prohibiting our ability to explode into this digital transformational world that we think is possible. If we can build applications that can tie your shoelaces, why can we not build applications that integrate government services? We have a lot of interest in the social media world. The world in the technology has been very successful. My background is computer science. I have a PhD in computer science. So we've done very well in the technology world, but we have a list of significant barriers. For example, some of you will know, those of you who have struggled with putting in e-government projects, and I will just name a few. For example, every system that we do, the Government of Canada and others, we are a huge country with a very dispersed population. Every minister, every department, every level of government has its own jurisdictional regulation silos. We talk about enterprise-wide. We talk about a government online was our mantra, a government online for government-wide. Yet we still maintain our government silo barriers. We do not have a way of managing those competing and conflicting needs of stakeholders. Those needs change, those needs influence the project, those needs influence the outcome, and yet our system requirements, our digital transformation support, our project management requirements do not give us any tools in order to manage those conflicting stakeholders. It's like we're all talking about it, but no one is doing it. And internationally, this is a big problem. We also have, and I won't go through the whole list, we also have business models that recognize the wrong metrics in order to put in successful systems. For example, we fund based upon, do you know the outcome? Do you know the cost? Have you done it before? Are you sure you'll do it in 3 years? Etc. Those are the elements that allow for simple, easy government funding, and it has to be within an electoral cycle. In the digital transformation world, in the e-government world, none of us can meet those requirements. We are doing unprecedented systems. We do not know the outcome. We don't know exactly what the outcome will be. It'll be a product of progressive elaboration. It will emerge. It will evolve. And those unprecedented systems, which I subscribe have a much bigger value in the digital transformation world, are not easily funded for that very reason. For example, there are opportunities in the e-government world to put requirements together between jurisdictions, and yet those are elements that are very hard. For example, something as small as building a system to match the need for parking spaces, which is a different jurisdiction, to having a government appointment or a doctor's appointment. We never think of taking those disparate ideas, using technology, and putting them together. It's not the same jurisdiction, it's not the same government, ergo, we have no such system. So we all circle around looking for parking spaces, adding to congestion, adding to climate problems, adding to car accidents when we have these technology available. And so we're not taking advantage of it. Another one to highlight is the fact that the world of project management, the project managers themselves are often And usually the arbitrator, the driver, because they're putting together two different systems, two different departments, two different areas of jurisdiction in creating a new solution which is not being driven by either one. It's very high risk. It's very expensive. Most players and these stakeholders may not want to be the driver. And so you end up having the project manager is the solution. It's the one that's driving forward a project in this field. And yet we have no technological support for such an area. We have a world that we talk about promises of interoperability and cost savings and integration, and yet we all work with the most basic systems of Excel and PowerPoint and Word and email, and none of those systems are interoperable. And yet we demand those requirements from our digital transformation enterprise-wide government that does things as vastly different as security, to heritage, to health, to safety, to transportation, etc. So our demands. We have an information age we've never had more information available to us. And yet the weight of that information for us as project managers or leaders or executives or academics, for us to weed through that information to find out what is relevant for this particular field, putting in an electronic health card, putting in a transportation system, addressing the automation of our passports, to have access to the information related to those fields is almost impossible to find. Our organizations are so dense. They are, I shouldn't say dense. Organizations, not the people. The organizations are dense in order for us to get access to that data. I'll also mention that we have an area of our subject matter expertise. In those of you who have worked in digital transformation know that how hard it is to get to the person involved in the particular area. We have layers and layers of organizational requirements. There's hierarchical needs. There's cultural demands. There's an inappropriateness in an executive talking to a junior officer briefing a minister or a deputy minister. There are cultural barriers that don't allow that. Again, then you find that it's very difficult to get to the information that you need. Another point that I'll mention is we talk about, for our digital transformation, it is a government-wide enterprise. Various different fields, cultures, legacy systems, history, stakeholders, user requirements, none of those things are in common or shared amongst one another, and yet we have a mandate for shared services, government enterprise systems. Many of our applications are SAP systems, for example, so you understand how difficult it is. And yet all of us are recognized in very basic shopping malls. They have exactly the same function, i.e. selling clothes or being in a retail world. They don't share systems, and yet we demand that in a government-wide enterprise that we should do this. So I think that in this world of digital transformation, I think there are so many opportunities for governments and countries to expand and embrace the power of this digital age that we have not yet hardly even touched. Yet, though we've been very successful, it's been transactionally based, in my opinion, as opposed to transformationally based. I think we need creativity. We need the ideas from people like you, from policymakers, from academics, from retail companies, from business companies, to work together to come up with these solutions. And we have very little formal mechanisms to work together. We have some private-public sector connections because, of course, they build our systems. I know that from being in the computer science world. But in the academic world, we do lots of research in this field, but we have very little natural ties or links with the demands of society so that we can make these advances. I think if we embrace these findings, if we come up with an integrated mechanism in order to address these barriers, I think that we can explode on our digital transformation, and I think we can share it with other countries like we were trying to do in our WITSA environment. I believe we need to change our expectations. We need to think in a much broader way, to think of what is possible and not be so limited by our jurisdictional silos. I think we need to understand in our business models that these projects, these outcomes are progressively elaborated, they are developed. And so our government officials, we don't want to be disadvantaged by not having our specific outcomes or metrics that suit their requirements. I propose that their business models need to meet our requirements for a digital environment world. Our destination is unknown, and I think there's an opportunities for us to learn very much from one another. It has been a real honor. Estonia is recognized around the world. I've admired the work that they've done for years, and it's a privilege and an honor to be here today. Thank you.